So in this video, we're going to talk about creating our development environment. Development environments are very important because this is where you're going to spend most of your time, and you want to make this development process as efficient as possible. Now, we're going to talk about two things in this video. First, we're going to talk about an integrated development environment, an IDE, so where you actually go and you type your code. And we're also going to talk about how to install PHP in your environment, whether you're on a Mac or you're in Windows. And so we'll do both of those in a moment here. So first, let's look at the integrated development environment. So how are you going to type your code? There's a number of options out there. I'm just going to show three, and you can choose your flavor. So in particular, I use PHPStorm. And so I have this JetBrains product installed on my Mac, and I use this for pretty much all of my development environments. So I have PHPStorm. I also have, for example, their Python editor, PyCharm. So I use their database environment called DataGrip for kind of querying databases. So I definitely am all in on JetBrains. I think that they're a great product, and I highly recommend them. I don't get anything for that endorsement. It's just I use their product on a daily basis. It does cost money, so it's not the free option. There are a few free options. There's Visual Studio Code, which is another great option. You can download it for your particular environment, whether you're on a Mac or whether you're on Windows. And it really is a great environment. If I didn't have access to PHPStorm, I would probably be using Visual Studio Code. And thirdly, the files that we're going to be editing in, they're just text files. So honestly, any kind of text editor will get you the minimum entry into being able to create your own PHP application. Now, there is a downside to this. Unless your text editor supports plugins that provide syntax highlighting and auto-completion and all of this other stuff, then you're doing yourself a little bit of a disservice because you're making it a little bit more difficult than it needs to be able to write good code. As an example, most modern integrated development environments like PHPStorm or Visual Studio Code, they will highlight errors so you can visually pick up on errors before you try to run the application. So there's three choices for integrated development environments. Again, pick your own flavor here. So throughout these videos, you're going to see me using PHPStorm. All right, so the second thing is we need PHP installed in our environment. I'm running on a Mac, and so installing PHP on my Mac is a little bit different than installing PHP in Windows, or at least it can be. So again, I'm going to provide a couple of options, and then you can choose your flavor and how you want to actually do the installations. You can look at php.net. You can search their docs. You'll find this page on installation and configuration, and they give you a number of selections here. So installing on Unix or Linux-based systems, installing on Mac OS, installing on Windows systems. And so they actually provide you with a number of recommendations. And I'm just going to highlight a few of them that are in here. So if you're on a Mac, probably the easiest way to install PHP is using Homebrew. And if you search the Homebrew documentation, you'll find a PHP page or PHP formula here, and you can say brew install PHP. So one of the challenges that I find for installing PHP this way is sometimes I'm developing apps that run on PHP 7. I have another app that runs on PHP 8. I try to get my applications to run on the most recent version of PHP. But when you install via Homebrew, you end up with a single version of PHP on your system, and that's what all your applications are running against. And that can be a bit limiting. Of course, you can install certain versions of PHP here, but to be honest, it's a bit of a hassle to try to maintain and manage which PHP version that you're running. Although once you do get PHP installed, PHP now comes with its built-in web server. So you can run a command, something like this. You can run php-s for server. You can provide a domain, localhost, and a port that you want to run your application on. And so once you install, for example, PHP using Homebrew, you can run this command and get your server running right away. And why do you need to do this? Because you need to have something that takes all of your PHP commands and actually runs them. And so that's what this server is going to do in the background. It's going to run your PHP commands, and if they, for example, render HTML, it'll render the HTML. Now, Homebrew isn't the only option. There are other applications also. So you can use XAMPP here. So it actually installs this whole package. So it'll install Apache, which is your web server. MariaDB is a database, PHP, and Perl, if you want all of that. And you can see it supports Windows, Linux, and Mac. And there's also another application called MAMP. And so you can see MAMP will install Apache, Nginx, PHP, and MySQL. and it'll run on your Mac or your Windows. And then the varieties of these things just continue. So there's WAMP. So then there's their AMPs, which is kind of WAMP and MAMP stack. And it looks like it works on both Windows and Mac. And you can see articles here that kind of compare all these versions together. Probably where most professional developers are going to land is they're going to probably containerize their application. So what that means is you're going to install this environment into a container and run it. And one of the most popular containers out there is Docker. And so you can see here on Docker Hub, here's a container for PHP. And so with that said, I'm going to be using a application development kit that I created called Kit. And it's on GitHub. You're free to use this. But what you're going to see me doing is setting up our application environment using Kit. And behind the scenes, Kit is using Docker. So what you're going to have is you have the Docker containers that you can control. And you can specify the PHP version or the MySQL version. And so you're going to get a complete development environment. All right, so with that said, let's use this application development kit and get this thing installed. Now this kit uses different templates, and what I'm going to show you here are just the templates. You really don't have to understand how the kit works, but I just want you to understand that there are different languages and different frameworks that the kit will create an application environment for you. We're going to be using this PHP template, but we're just going to follow the instructions here. So the first thing is to make a project directory, and you can see that on the left hand side I have my PHPStorm environment. I have this PHP for Beginners folder, and I'm going to use JetBrains built-in terminal. And so you can see again, now I have a terminal window open in this folder. So if I print this working directory, you can see it's just on my desktop in a couple of directories here. So I have this, and right now this directory is totally empty. So I've done these first two steps here, and I'm going to use this git clone. I'm going to copy this. And so what this is doing is we are git cloning this kit into a directory called infra. And so I'm going to go ahead and run that. And you can see it's cloning the directory down. And at the very top, you can now see we have an infra directory that's created for us. And inside that, you'll just find the code that's in this repository here. So all of this code now is on your local environment. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I have now, if I list, I'm going to see that infra directory. I'm going to go ahead and switch into that infra directory. And so now I have a terminal window open inside my infrastructure directory. And in fact, just so I keep everything clear, I'm going to rename this session to infra. And then following along the instructions here, we've already switched directories into the infrastructure, and you should run this command. So this command installs the kit alias, so you can just use the word or the command kit. And I've already done this a couple of times, and so when it runs, it just says install in the kit alias, and it makes sure that everything is all loaded for you. So you should be all set once you do that. All right, so after you've installed the kit alias, you should be set to use the kit. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a development environment. We're not going to follow the instructions over here anymore because this is mostly creating a Laravel development environment, but we're going to create a PHP development environment. So we're going to run kit new PHP, and then after I hit enter, it's going to ask me some questions, and I'm just going to answer those questions. So enter the application name. We're going to call this application demo. If you have an existing application, so an existing code base that's somewhere maybe in a GitHub repo, this is where you can enter that GitHub repo, and it'll pull it down for you, so you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from whatever point your application's at. We don't have an existing application, so we're going to start from scratch here. And so now it's going to start to ask you for some ports. Now, what we're talking about is when we start up our environment, our application is going to be running on a certain port number. Now, if you have other applications running, you may have to change these port numbers so that you don't end up with conflicts. I don't have anything running on these ports, so I'm just going to accept them as their defaults. The next couple of questions are about the database. Now, in this particular series, we're not going to do anything with the database, but we're still going to answer the questions because we want the database environment to be available to us if we decide that we want to use it later on. So I'm just going to accept the defaults here, and then it's going to create my environment. I'm going to let it complete all the way to the end. All right, so that's finally completed, and what we're going to see over here is it's already popped up a browser. You may get this privacy error because in this development environment, we're using locally generated SSL certificates, so they don't have that normal certificate chain that really secures an SSL cert. But this is fine in our local environment, so we're going to go ahead and click Advance, and we're going to say go ahead and proceed to this. And we'll see our hello world is right here. I'm just going to pump that up. So at this point, we have a working PHP environment. Let's just go back through and see what it's done here for us. After I got done answering my questions, it created a new directory. And you can see that there's a .code demo. So that's under my infra. And so you can see that here in apps, there's a demo. This is my infrastructure for that. So we're not going to cover the details of what's in here. Needless to say, this is where my Docker file exists that created the environment that we're going to be using. So I'm just going to close this up. We don't need to worry about that. Then it created a PHP Hello World application. And you can see that in the code directory. So now there's a code directory. And then there's a demo, which is the name of our application. And here is where we'll be able to see our PHP application. So if I go under public and index, you're going to see this hello world, and that corresponds to what was printed out right there. Don't worry about this yet. We're going to cover that in future videos when we start talking about PHP itself, but just know that that now exists. Then the other thing this did is it started our Docker environment for us. So I've previously run this Docker environment on my Mac, and so it didn't have to download any Docker containers. If you run this for the very first time, it's going to have to go through a process where it downloads all the layers of the Docker containers, and that may take some time. So just be patient and let it get through it, and you'll end up at this point where it actually starts to run these containers for you. It does try to automatically update your hosts file. So when I run this, this is under demo_dev.local. In order for this to resolve, that entry needs to be in your local host file. And depending on if you're running Windows or a Mac, that file exists, and that resolves this domain name, demo_dev.local, to 127.0.0.1, and that resolves it, and it allows it to run here. Next thing it does is it does a composer install. So you're going to see that I have a composer file. So it's pretty much an empty composer file. There's not really any dependencies that you'll see in here. But later on, if I want to add a composer package, we're all set up to do that. It also has an empty package.json file. So later on, if I want to install JavaScript packages, I can do that later on too. So after it gets done installing here, it's going to run npm install. There's not really a build command yet for this, so we get a few errors, and then it opened it up in a browser tab, and it shows you what ports you're on. And so this application development kit makes it really super easy to get started and get your environment set up. But regardless, no matter how you set your PHP environment up, go ahead and get it set up. You can use WAMP, you can use XAMPP, you can use this application development kit. All the future videos are going to assume that you have a PHP environment installed and that you know how to run your server. Make sure you understand those two things.